I did not reject the IMF because I hate the West. I rejected it because no contract, no matter how polished, should ever cost a mother her land, her voice, or her dignity. And if you still believe Africa is only valuable when it bleeds, then you've never watched a woman from Burkina Faso turn a seed into sovereignty.
What if the most powerful revolution in Africa isn't armed with guns or flags, but with butter? Not just any butter. Shea butter. A product once tucked away in village jars, now flowing through luxury spas in Paris and boardrooms in New York. But here's the shock. It's no longer Nigeria. It's not even Ghana. The new king of Shea is Burkina Faso, a landlocked country once dismissed as poor, now crowned as Africa's leading exporter of ethical beauty. But this isn't a business story. It's a battle over who gets to profit from Africa's soil, who owns the narrative of value, and whether women, the traditional stewards of Shea, are finally owning the very chains that once exploited them. If you still believe justice isn't just about borders, but about ownership, then stay with us, because what you're about to hear won't be in the evening news. Shea butter is more than a product. It is a legacy, a labor, and for generations, a lifeline. Extracted from the nut of the Vitellaria paradoxa tree, shea butter has been used by African communities for centuries to cook, to heal wounds, to soften skin, to bless newborns. It is born in the Sahel, the same belt of land that colonial maps once labeled barren. Yet from these dry savannas, women have drawn wealth with bare hands and ancient knowledge. But history has not been gentle. For decades, this golden balm flowed out of Africa, in raw form trucked across borders, sold at rock-bottom prices, refined in European factories, and returned to African shelves wearing foreign labels and foreign profit margins. In Ghana, Nigeria, and Benin, women did the work, but middlemen took the margin. Global beauty brands spoke of natural and organic, but rarely of ownership. Then came the turning point, a question asked not by economists, but by farmers. Why are we exporting shea nuts while importing poverty? In 2015, Burkina Faso began planting the seeds of an answer. But it wasn't until Captain Ibrahim Traoré came to power that shea butter moved from being a cottage industry to a pillar of national sovereignty. He didn't just speak of trade, he redefined it. No more exporting value. No more silent partnerships with foreign firms. No more policies written in hotel boardrooms while women crushed kernels in the sun. The Traoré administration placed agricultural value chains at the center of its economic agenda. That meant investing in rural cooperatives, building processing plants, in-country training women, not just as laborers, but as exporters. It meant telling the world, shea is not your secret anymore. It's our strategy. And that shift, quiet, defiant, purposeful, has redrawn the map. In 2024, Burkina Faso officially surpassed Ghana and Nigeria in certified organic shea butter exports. A nation with no coastline under sanctions facing economic pressure overtook two regional giants. How? Because for the first time in the shea economy, the hands that harvested were the same hands that shipped. The profit stayed, the pride stayed, the power shifted, and the world took notice. The year is 2024. On the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso, a 43-year-old woman named Mariam Zongo stands beside a steel vat filled with boiling shea butter. The scent is earthy, familiar, and strong, just like her. A decade ago, she crushed shea nuts with bare hands for less than $1 a day. Today, her cooperative exports to Canada, Japan, and South Korea. Each eco-friendly package carries a QR code linking buyers to her village. It doesn't just say made in Africa, it says owned by Africa. I never thought I'd have a bank account, Miriam says. But this butter, has taken me places my passport never could. Hers is not an isolated story. From the rural hills of Gaoua to the dry plains of Fata, over 850,000 women now form the backbone of Burkina Faso's shea industry. not as laborers, as stakeholders. But make no mistake, this breakthrough did not come by accident. It was born out of betrayal. For decades, Burkina Faso watched as its most valuable exports, gold cotton Shea, left its soil without ever changing its fate. Middlemen siphoned off profits. European and Asian companies returned with branded products, lotions, creams, cosmetics, sold at 100 times the price of the raw materials. Even in Ghana and Nigeria, once considered the Shea powerhouses, unregulated supply chains led to inconsistent quality and weakened bargaining power. The betrayal wasn't just economic, it was historical. Africa was told it could export raw materials, but never value. It could provide labor, but never leadership. It could send daughters to pick nuts, but never run the factories. But then came a new chapter. Under President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso made value addition not just a goal, but a declaration. With bold policy changes, the state subsidized equipment, built modern processing centers, and cut export taxes for locally processed Shea. They launched the Shea is Ours national campaign, reminding citizens and corporations alike that no matter how global the demand became, the root of it all was African. And more importantly, African women. Across the country, over 500 women-led cooperatives have gained certifications from Fairtrade EcoCert and USDA Organic. These labels aren't just cosmetic. They allow Burkina Faso to command premium prices and build trust with ethical buyers. While Ghana still exports mostly raw nuts and Nigeria battles illegal trafficking rings, Burkina Faso is exporting narrative control. Because buyers today no longer want just product, they want story. And Burkina Faso has the most powerful one yet. It's not just the purity of our butter, one cooperative leader said. It's the purity of our purpose. Still, this shift came at a cost. Foreign firms accustomed to cheap labor and easy access began to push back. Some offered under-the-table deals to bypass cooperatives. Others lobbied international development agencies to redirect funds away from Burkina Faso, citing political instability. But Traoré's administration held the line. When global corporations hesitated, the government turned to regional partners and community capital. With support from the African Development Bank, Burkina Faso built West Africa's first all-women-run Shea industrial complex, capable of processing 50 tons per month, with childcare services, health programs, and education centers all on site. This wasn't just a factory, it was a blueprint, one that says, we do not need your pity, we need your respect. One that says we can process, package, and profit without being anyone's proxy. One that whispers quietly but powerfully across the continent. The time of exporting raw Africa is over. But here's what truly changed the game: traceability. By embedding QR codes on every product, buyers in Paris or Seoul can now trace a jar of shea butter all the way back to its exact village, to the woman who made it, to the story she carries. It's no longer anonymous. It's intentional. It's intimate. And in a world where luxury is increasingly defined by ethics, Burkina Faso now sits at the table, not as a beggar, but as a brand. But this isn't just about skincare. It's about what happens when a nation chooses nurture over extraction. When it says, we will not dig our gold and stay poor. We will press our butter and become sovereign. It's a radical act of reclamation. And the world isn't just watching, it's adjusting. European buyers now list Burkina Faso as the preferred source of ethical Shea. Major brands are shifting supplier contracts. International NGOs are rewriting their playbooks. Because when the smallest country in the room stands up and declares itself whole, it forces giants to shrink or listen. Burkina Faso, once written off as landlocked and underdeveloped, has become a moral mirror for the rest of the continent. The message is clear. We don't need coastline to chart our future. We don't need charity to claim our worth. We need ownership. We need belief. We need policy that honors the calloused hands of mothers who turned a seed into substance. This is not a product story. It is a power story. And it's only just begun. Behind every block of shea butter stamped organic lies a quiet war. It's not fought with weapons, but with contracts. Not waged in jungles, but in boardrooms and customs offices. And like so many battles before, it's about one thing: who keeps the value. For years, Burkina Faso's shea butter was exported under labels it didn't control by companies it didn't own to countries that rarely looked back. Even as women worked 12-hour days roasting, grinding, and churning shea into gold profits, evaporated the moment trucks crossed the border. But in 2024, something changed. A single data point triggered an earthquake in the global market. Burkina Faso had surpassed Nigeria and Ghana in refined, certified organic shea exports. That wasn't just a milestone, it was a message, because for decades, those two economic giants dominated the shea industry by volume, but buyers weren't looking for volume anymore. They wanted purity, provenance, and power rooted in people, and Burkina Faso had all three. What truly shocked the world wasn't the butter. It was the infrastructure behind it. In cities like Banfora and Dédougou, modern processing centers powered by solar energy had replaced rudimentary open-air pits. Quality control labs were staffed by local scientists trained in Dakar and Accra. Logistics were no longer managed by foreign middlemen, but by cooperatives using regionally integrated supply routes. And when foreign buyers came knocking, expecting the usual bargain, they were met with something unfamiliar: negotiation. You want our butter? Then respect our women, respect our process, respect our price. This was no longer the Africa they remembered. Compliant, silent, grateful. This was a new rhythm. One set not by donors or debt, but by women in aprons with ledgers and leverage. And the deeper they looked, the clearer the truth became. Burkina Faso wasn't just producing shea. It was producing sovereignty. But with every rise comes resistance. Foreign interests didn't stand idle. Several multinational firms previously dominant in Ghana and Nigeria tried to bypass Burkina Faso's new cooperatives by sourcing directly from uncertified regions or offering inflated prices to unregistered suppliers. It was an attempt to destabilize the unity from within, to divide and extract as they always had. But this time, the cooperatives were ready. With support from the government and partners like the UNDP and the African Development Bank, they created a national database of certified producers. Every shipment was logged, tracked, and traceable. Violations were flagged. Contracts were public. For the first time in the region's history, transparency became a weapon. And what the outside world hadn't accounted for was this: Burkina Faso's women weren't just workers, they were watchdogs. One foreign supplier found this out the hard way. After attempting to manipulate quality reports, they were publicly blacklisted across 19 cooperatives. Their exports were rejected by customs. Their logo was removed from local supplier halls. A reporter asked a cooperative leader how she pulled this off. Simple, she said. This is our land. We know every tree, every seed, every lie. And the truth didn't stop at borders. As Burkina Faso's shea exports climbed, international media scrambled to reframe the story. Some called it a miracle. Others used the term unlikely success. But what's truly unlikely in their eyes? That African women, rural, uneducated in Western terms, could out-organize, out-market, and outlast global corporations. That a landlocked nation with no ocean ports could build an export model stronger than countries with massive infrastructure loans. That development could happen without debt. Those weren't miracles. They were miscalculations by a system that never expected Africa to speak on its own terms. And then came the final crack in the facade. Global cosmetics companies began branding their products with phrases like Burkina Origin Shea, proudly touting their new ethical sourcing, while quietly lobbying for looser import regulations in Europe and North America. They wanted the story, not the sovereignty. They wanted the butter, not the backbone. But this time, Burkina Faso said no. It passed new laws requiring all exporters to include the name of the cooperative and the region on every package. That meant no more anonymous sourcing, no more backroom dilution. If you wanted the story, you had to tell the truth. And the truth is this: for every dollar spent on a jar of organic shea butter in Brooklyn or Berlin, more of that value now stays in the village where it was born. That doesn't just change profit margins, it changes power dynamics. Women who were once invisible now lead delegations to international trade fairs. Teenagers who used to flee to Europe for opportunity now manage logistics in their home province. Grandmothers who once cracked nuts in silence now sit on cooperative boards. What the world dismissed as just a cosmetic product has become the sharp edge of a revolution. Burkina Faso didn't just expose the truth, it made the truth profitable, and in doing so, it challenged every lie that said Africa could not lead. Every revolution has its echo. In Burkina Faso, the sound is not gunfire. It's the hum of grinding machines in rural processing centers. It's the voice of a woman negotiating shipping rates in 3 languages. It's the laughter of children whose mothers, for the first time, don't have to choose between work and school fees. When Burkina Faso restructured its Shea industry from the ground up, the effects were immediate. In 2024 alone, the sector generated over $250 million in certified exports, outpacing Ghana's $180 million to Nigeria's $160 million. But numbers only tell part of the story. The true transformation was social. Across provinces, women's cooperatives became community engines. These weren't just income groups. They became networks of leadership education and resistance. In towns like Tenado and Kaya, women who once had to ask permission to speak in village meetings were now being elected to chair agricultural councils. Land ownership laws, long slanted against women, began to bend under pressure. Traditional chiefs, witnessing economic success, offered parcels of land for permanent use by all-female groups, an act almost unthinkable a decade ago. And this is no small feat in a region where patriarchy runs deep. "Before I had no voice," said one cooperative leader. "Now when I speak, men listen because I'm feeding the economy." Meanwhile, rural youth, often neglected in national development plans, are returning to villages, not out of obligation, but out of opportunity. Cooperative-run training programs teach not just shea processing, but bookkeeping, e-commerce, and product development. Young men once tempted by migration now see a future in local cosmetics brands and regional logistics. But the consequences weren't only internal. Burkina Faso's success cast a long shadow. Other African nations, especially in the Sahel, began to reevaluate their export models. In Mali, women's groups lobbied for similar certifications. In Niger, proposals for local value addition gained momentum. But few had the infrastructure policy support or political clarity that Traoré's administration had provided. And so, Burkina Faso remained years ahead, not just in Shea, but in the assertion of ownership. Predictably, pushback came. Some international NGOs, once partners, began quietly freezing grants. Development agencies issued cautionary reports, citing political risk and lack of alignment with Western economic frameworks. Translation: they weren't in control anymore. Meanwhile, smuggling networks expanded in border regions. Attempts were made to traffic raw shea nuts out of the country to bypass the local processing mandate. But the government responded swiftly with stricter customs enforcement and community alerts. Women themselves began guarding their value chains, filming illegal traders, alerting local radio reporting violations directly to regional authorities. The message was clear: this is ours. Touch it and we'll fight. And they weren't fighting alone. In 2025, Burkina Faso partnered with Côte d'Ivoire and Togo to form the Shea Solidarity Bloc, a regional pact to standardize certification, raise prices, and create a continental supply hub. They called it Butter Without Borders. This wasn't just branding. It was a declaration of African unity through value. But perhaps the most powerful consequence cannot be measured in tons or dollars. It is this Burkina Faso changed the definition of power. In a world where strength is often associated with military bases, mineral wealth, or diplomatic ties, this small landlocked nation found its power in butter. But not the product, the process, the ownership, the refusal to be cheapened, the courage to say, "We will no longer export our poverty for you to refine into profit." This stance, bold, unapologetic, did not make Burkina Faso many friends in high places, but it made millions of allies in low ones. Across Africa, across the diaspora, across rural America, where farmers understood the weight of being underpaid and overworked, the story resonated. And for women especially, the consequences were spiritual. They were no longer just contributors to the economy. They were architects of it. In one processing center near Koudougou, a mural was painted across the wall. It shows a woman pressing Shea, her child strapped to her back, the rising sun in her eyes. Above her, the words read, "This butter built our future, and we churned it ourselves." What happened in Burkina Faso was not simply an agricultural success. It was a strategic rupture. It dismantled decades of economic conditioning that told Africa produce, but do not process, harvest, but do not own, supply, but do not speak. By seizing control of its Shea industry, Burkina Faso rewrote the unwritten rules of engagement between Africa and the global economy. And in doing so, it forced a new question onto the table. What if Africa stopped exporting what it doesn't control? To understand the full weight of this question, we must recognize the system it defies. For over half a century, Africa has been positioned at the bottom of global value chains. From cocoa in Côte d'Ivoire, to gold in the Congo, to lithium in Zimbabwe, the continent supplies raw materials to the world's wealthiest corporations, while receiving a fraction of the wealth those materials generate. This is not accidental. It's the architecture of economic colonialism repackaged under terms like development partnership, foreign direct investment and aid, a system that praises Africa for growth in exports while ensuring the most valuable part of that export never touches African hands. Burkina Faso's Shea strategy flips that script. It doesn't ask for fair trade. It demands full trade. It doesn't negotiate for inclusion. It builds its own door. And this model, quiet, rural, woman-led, is now becoming a case study in resistance economics. Let's be clear, Shea butter is not gold. It doesn't require complex refineries or high-tech labs. But that's precisely what makes it dangerous to the status quo. Because it proves that sovereignty is achievable now without billions in loans, without waiting for permission from the IMF, without compromising on values. It shows that, with vision, infrastructure, and political will, even a landlocked country can control its destiny and thrive. So, what are the strategic pillars behind this Model 1? Localization of value chains. Burkina Faso's government invested in local processing instead of exporting raw nuts. This increased domestic employment, raised export prices by 300%, and ensured profits stayed home. 2. Community ownership. By prioritizing cooperatives and requiring traceability, the country minimized corporate capture. This wasn't just about economics, it was about narrative control. Buyers didn't just buy butter, they bought into a story led by African women. 3. Smart partnerships. Burkina Faso didn't reject global partnerships, it just redefined the terms. It worked with allies like the African Development Bank and select NGOs, but only when those partnerships strengthened national goals, not undermined them. Number 4. Policy as defense. Through export-friendly tax codes, anti-smuggling enforcement and public campaigns like Shea is ours. The government treated its agricultural strategy like it would treat a military operation. Because in a world of trade wars, policy is the new battleground. This isn't just a Burkina Faso story. It's a template for transformation. Imagine if the same model were applied to cocoa in Ghana, where raw exports feed billion-dollar chocolate empires while farmers struggle to eat. Cobalt in the DRC, where multinational firms exploit labor under armed guards to fuel the EV boom. Coffee in Ethiopia, where global brands profit off the rituals of villages they'll never visit. What Burkina Faso has done is show that there is another path, one where Africa doesn't just integrate into the global economy, but reshapes it. And make no mistake, the powers that be have noticed. Western donors are recalibrating. Investment reports are quietly warning about growing protectionism in West Africa. International trade lawyers are scrutinizing Burkina Faso's new laws for possible violations of WTO agreements. Development consultants are advising Ghanaian exporters not to overemphasize sovereignty, lest they lose access to Western markets. That is how you know the model works, because it threatens the default. And in the background, the larger geopolitical picture is shifting. Burkina Faso is not acting alone. It is part of a growing movement across the Sahel, the Alliance of Sahel States AES, a political, military, and economic coalition of nations reclaiming control from external powers. In mining, in telecom, and now in agriculture, the AES is laying the groundwork for a sovereign regional bloc. It is no coincidence that the rise of Burkina Faso's shea butter industry coincides with its political defiance against France, the IMF, and ECOWAS sanctions. Because sovereignty is never singular. When you seize one domain, the others must follow or fall. This is not just about exports. It's about narrative. For decades, the world has told Africa, we will tell your story. We will define your worth. We will decide what progress looks like. Burkina Faso answered, no, not anymore. And that answer is now echoing from the deserts of Mali to the ports of Lome to the black churches of Detroit, where descendants of those who once picked cotton now watch African women export butter and claim power. This isn't charity. It's strategy. This isn't symbolic. It's structural. And if Africa listens not to Paris or Washington, but to Banfora and Gawa, then shea butter may be just the beginning. If you've ever questioned the wars fought in your name, if you've ever wondered why the news rarely shows Africa building only burning, then ask yourself now, why does it take a jar of butter for the world to finally listen? Because this isn't about skincare. It's about skin hours and how long it's been exploited, ignored, and misunderstood. Burkina Faso is not just making shea butter. It is making history. It is showing that justice can be engineered, not just demanded. That sovereignty isn't a slogan, but a supply chain. That dignity is measurable in land titles, export codes, and the hands of women who will no longer be silent. If you marched for justice in Selma, if you lit candles for Soweto, if you ever doubted whether empires could change, look again. In the dry heart of West Africa, women are doing what no billionaire ever could, turning the soil of forgotten lands into gold that stays home. So here's the question. Wherever you are in Atlanta or Accra, Paris or Port Harcourt, will you stand with them? Will you support products that keep value in Africa? Will you share stories that empower, not pity? Will you remember that every purchase, every repost, every silence is a choice? If you believe that Africa deserves to own what she creates, if you believe that justice smells like roasted shea and sounds like women reclaiming power, then say it with us. Africa is not for sale. Africa rises.